The Battle of Bakhmut is becoming a pretty good example that in war, any sort of positive news is relative. And there were a couple articles put out over the last few days that we're going to dig into here, one from the Wall Street Journal and one from the Kyiv Independent, that paint a pretty nasty picture for both sides. You got to dig through a lot of negative to find any sort of positive in either one of the articles. But to zoom out, kind of big picture, looking at Bakhmut, the Russian forces continue to make progress to the north, south, and have made some incursions into the eastern portion of the city. It continues to look like Ukraine is on the verge of being cut off, but worth noting that the red on this map from the Institute of the Study of War, the red areas occupied by Russia don't actually have to touch on the map for the Ukrainian forces in the city to be cut off. Already, many of these areas to the west are under Russian indirect fire control, so they have observers, maybe drones, able to watch those roads and hit them with rockets, mortars, artillery, whatever it might be, as Ukrainian forces try to enter or exit the city. As those come under direct fire control, so machine guns, anti-tank guided missiles, things like that, it's going to become, I don't want to say impossible, it becomes very, very challenging to actually move through that area, especially if you're dodging fire from overhead as well as the north and the south. Now, amidst all that, this morning, March 6th, a press release was put out by Ukraine saying that President Zelensky met with some of his military leadership, and what came out of that was, quote, "They spoke in favor of continuing the defensive operation and further strengthening our positions in Bakhmut." So no matter what this map looks like, it sounds like Ukraine is planning on continuing the fight there, and if anything, maybe putting more forces into that front. All right, diving into these articles, the first one from the Wall Street Journal really focuses more on how the Wagner group has been used during the fight in Bakhmut. This is the primary force that Ukraine is going up against in this area of the country. And they get some accounts from Ukrainian soldiers on the ground as well as some of the Wagner fighters that were captured. And it's just how the troops are being used that I think is very, very different from what we might expect in the United States. They talk about how there's small groups of these Wagner soldiers with little to no training that are sent out essentially to draw fire. And when the Ukrainian forces open up on them, be it with a machine gun or a mortar or small arms fire, that gives away the Ukrainian position that is being watched. So there's something in overwatch, somebody on the ground with binoculars, maybe a drone overhead. And when Ukraine opens fire, that gives away a position that is then relayed back to Russian artillery, mortars, aircraft, drones, whatever it might be. They hammer the Ukrainian positions, and then the next phase of the assault kicks off. It says in some cases, those assaults are carried out again by very poorly limited, equipped Wagner soldiers. In other cases, it might be more trained and better equipped troops kind of sweeping through areas that have been opened up. It's a brutal way to fight. I do think that there's a mix here. There's been a lot talked about Russia using human wave tactics in this war. I think that's a little bit overblown. When I hear human wave tactics, I think of World War I, a whole battalion, a whole regiment, a whole division comes up out of the trench and in line moves across no man's land facing down machine gun fire at 100 yards, right? To me, that is human wave. There were instances in the Pacific during World War II where Japan would try to throw so many bodies that there would literally be more soldiers than machine gun bullets available at that position, and they would overwhelm the position. To me, that is what I think of when I hear human wave attacks. In this war, there's been videos and pictures of large groups of Russian soldiers killed out in the open, but I don't know that I've seen more than 10 or 15 in a single frame. Doesn't mean it's not happening, but I think what we are learning about in this war is these human wave tactics are more just sending small groups out, 3, 5, 10, that with little hope that they're going to survive, essentially suicide missions to draw fire in order to progress the assault forward. I have a feeling this is more in line with, when you hear human wave attacks, I think this is probably more what it's talking about. Now, this same article in the Wall Street Journal talked about how this format has essentially been successful in the sense of taking territory around Bakhmut and overrunning Ukrainian positions one at a time. And it's not as though the one position is taken, the line collapses. Ukraine has built a defense in depth throughout this whole city. So there's accounts where a house is taken and destroyed, so the Ukrainian fighters move back to the next defensive position. And the way Russia appears to be doing this is with a heavy loss of life through these Wagner forces that are viewed somewhat as disposable. That's how it comes across here. I have a hard time understanding how any country squares doing this with their overall objectives. These might be prisoners, they might be convicts, but they're people. They're husbands, brothers, fathers, sons. And they're, the way this is portrayed shows them just being used as cannon fodder. They're bait. Go out there and get shot. So the next group has the possibility of maybe advancing 5 more meters. Now, amidst all this, they do talk about how this tactic is doing the trick in Bakhmut and that it is grinding down Ukrainian forces. Again, according to this Wall Street Journal article, one area they hit on that I think is going to draw a lot of debate, and rightfully so, is this article talks about how many of Ukraine's more elite units have had to fill the gaps in Bakhmut because it was at risk of falling for so long. And I've heard a lot of people say just the opposite, that Ukraine is not putting their best trained, best resources troops in Bakhmut simply because it is a grind. I can see an argument for either side. Bakhmut is so important, so you have to put your best troops there. Or Bakhmut is so well fortified and it's such a grind that just put in somebody with a few weeks of training because all they have to do is stay in a bunker and pull the trigger. But understanding what units are where on the battlefield and the strength of those units is like top-level military intelligence. Russia would kill for that information. So the idea that, a random commenter YouTube video knows where all of the exact top Ukrainian units are being deployed at any given moment, it's just speculation. Now, while that first article focused more on how Russia is essentially throwing bodies into a meat grinder for 1 to 5 meters at a time, this article from the Kyiv Independent talks a little bit more about the challenges that Ukraine is having in holding the city. There was a quote in here where they said their unit went to the front in December with 500 soldiers. They're now down to less than 150. And that soldier continued by saying, quote, "When you go out to the position, it's not even a 50-50 chance that you'll come out of there alive. It's more like 30-70, which it's not crazy that the losses are high, that it's a deadly, deadly fight in Bakhmut. That hasn't been a secret. The number of casualties from each side has been kept relatively under wraps by both sides. And it's not just in this specific battle, but throughout the whole war, trying to dial in exact casualties on either side, it's been a crapshoot. Now, this article talks a lot more about how the communication is a challenge between Ukrainian units at Bakhmut. One mortarman talks about their lack of ammo. So they get 10 120 millimeter rounds a day. That's like one fire mission. That's not much at all. They add to that a lot of people showing up to fight in some of the hottest areas of this front barely know how to fire a rifle. Little to no training at all. So overall, this one really does not paint a good picture for Ukrainian forces holding the city. So to go back to my opening comment here, I think you've got to dig through a bunch of negative information to try to find any little ounce of positive news for either side. But big picture, that's war. But I'll link both these articles in the description below so you can check them out. Let me know what you think. We'll see y'all next time.